Good afternoon. Welcome for joining us. My name is Justin McAdam. I'm the chairman of the Distressed Unit Appeal Board here for our regular Thursday, February 23rd meeting. As is our custom, we will take public comment to start our meeting after we turn to the minutes to give people time to sign up or send a message. You currently have 3 individuals signed up to testify. If you're not on the list, please send a message here shortly. Our first item of business is the approval of 2 sets of minutes. First, the January 26th, and then second, the February 6th executive session minutes. Those were circulated in advance of the meeting. Are there any comments, corrections, or notes that need to be made to those minutes? All right. I would entertain a motion to approve.
I make a motion that we approve January 26, 2023 public meeting and the February 6, 2023 executive session meeting.
The motion, is there a second?
Second.
All right. We do have one member joining us virtually today. Mr. Miller, would you call the roll?
Ms. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Bennett,
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would like to abstain from the voting on the meeting minutes of the 26th since I was not here. But I will approve the executive session minutes of February 6th.
Thank you.
Mr. Troy,
Yes.
and Ms. Kabaki.
Yes.
4-0 advisory.
Yeah, and I approve them as well. So we knew I was going to. All right, thank you. We have approved the minutes. We'll turn next to public comment. We'll start with those joining us here in person. First up, we have Mrs. Lavetta Tyndall. Mrs. Tyndall.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks to all of you for being here. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mrs. Lavetta Tyndall. I am a taxpaying citizen resident of Gary, Indiana. Graduate of the 1966 graduate of the historically profound and architecturally renowned great institution of learning, the Gary Theodore Roosevelt High School. I'm wondering why there are 6 principals that have taken position at Westside Leadership Academy in the past less than 6 years. Why is that necessary for such a term colonel in the head of the school? Why is it that the advisory board is denied free access to the Westside Leadership Academy building for general visits and meetings? We were denied access to the building. I'm sorry, I don't have the date, but it took place earlier this month. And we were referred to the Gary Public Library to hold our meeting. Why was that? I want to know what is the status of the bus transportation of our students. Do we have buses that are running and providing the service that's needed by our students so they can get to and from school safely and in a timely fashion? What's the academic improvement status? What's the relationship with parents? I understand that furniture that was purchased recently for the Bethune School was too small to accommodate the students. I'd like someone to explain to us how that could be possible. If you've been running schools and you've been leading in administering schools for several years, how do you make a flaw? How do you commit a flaw like that? And what was done with the furniture? I want to know what has been done with the furniture that has been removed from the buildings that are identified and designated as being standing in position to be demolished. What are you doing with the furnishings? Why, if we are a poor school, financially poor, why isn't salvaging, selling, creating some practical, logical use for the materials, the furnishings from the buildings that are being demolished? How will the inferior and adequate Chrome books be addressed? What are the new arrangements for e-learning support? Have they been established, or what are they? And what's the status of the auditorium renovation at West Side Leadership Academy? There are several things that are going on that continue to go, that we've expressed this dislike for under this administration. This committee, this agency has been aware of that, but you've done nothing about it. And we don't appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Tindall. Up next, we have Ms. Kendra Johnson.
Good afternoon, each and every one of you. My name is Kendra Johnson. I was a parent in the Gary Community School Corporation for 25 years, from 1990 up until 2020. And I also had four grandsons that went through the Gary School Corporation for a short period of time. First of all, this is February, and as any educator knows, this is African American or Black History Month. And if you want to see a lot of African American history, all you have to do is go to Gary, Indiana. Roosevelt High School, the school that is no longer open, was host and graduated many celebrities, one of which was my uncle, Coach Willie J. Williams, who broke wrote Jesse Orange track record and went on to become a well-known coach at Westside High School. Also, the first female commercial African-American aviator taught at Roosevelt High School. One of the Jackson Five attended Roosevelt High School. And I could go on and on. And it's sad that now this historical institution is closed. But thankfully, the building still stands, so there's an opportunity to save the vital history of Roosevelt. Also, February 1st through the 4th, I attended the 2023 SESEA conference that was held right here in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I'm thankful and grateful because the people of Gary, Indiana believed in me so much and invested in me so much. They provided me with the $700 registration fee that it took to attend. And this conference was novel for the reason that it was both virtual and in person. And I took advantage of both of the formats. And now, because of that training I have received, I plan on going back to Gary, Indiana, and hosting workshops involving Title I and parental involvement, as well as partnering with some entities down here in Indianapolis and doing the same. So, but it just goes to show you that the people in Gary, Indiana will invest in education for their children and for their families if they are approached in a fair and transparent way. If they see the plan and they become part of the plan, then they will help implement the plan.
Ms. Johnson.
Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you. Up next, we have Ms. Tracy Coleman joining us virtually. Ms. Coleman, give us a moment. You may need to unmute yourself, Ms. Coleman. It looks like we can't do it from our side entirely. Ms. Coleman, if you can hear us, you need to unmute your line. Okay. Ms. Coleman, we'll take a look and we'll come back at the end of the meeting and try again. Let's keep moving forward on our agenda here. We will come back to Ms. Coleman at this point. Up next, we have the school update from Dr. McNulty. Dr. McNulty, thank you for joining us.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate you allowing me to join virtually. I have an obligation that I have to attend to in the district shortly. So again, I appreciate you allowing me to join virtually. I look forward to seeing you in person next month. A few updates for the district is I wanted to let everybody know that we just completed our audit through SBOA. We have our exit meeting on Monday, but our preliminary feedback is very, very positive. So we look forward to being able to share those official results with you at the next meeting. And I'm sure Nicole will be excited to be able to dig into those deeper. But so far, it's looking very, very positive. So I'm proud of the team here and all the work that's been made. As you are aware, we've had 2 RFPs out, one for janitorial services and one for busing. Those are ongoing. And again, we look forward to being able to present 2 contracts to the board here within the next 6 weeks on both of those contracts. And we have had lots of interest for both janitorial and busing, which is a positive thing for our district. Additionally, we just had our spring ADM count. And I'm proud to say that we're up 197 students from the fall. So that's great improvement. Now we need to retain those kids for when the next school year happens. So we're going to be working diligently on that process and hopefully capturing another couple of hundred kids next fall. But good news is we are up 197 students for spring. We've been working hard in our CTE program, career technical education, to add some more strands for our students. We have 3 to 4 new strands that we're going to be introducing in the fall. We've partnered with Alliance Steel here in Gary, Indiana, as well as Methodist Hospital, and also, again, our firefighters. And we have signed 2 more MOUs with some of our neighboring districts who are going to be sending their students to our CTE program in the fall. So those are great enhancements and added enrollment for our district as well. Really super excited to say that yesterday was our beverage and GPA STEM site visits from the DOE. We don't have the information of whether or not we were approved yet, but the visits were extremely positive. Students did a fantastic job showcasing what they've been doing in class with regards to STEM and project-based learning. So we're very, very optimistic that we'll hopefully become STEM certified by next month for 2 more schools, leaving 3 left in the district that we hope to tackle for next year. So that's great work on behalf of those schools. As you're aware, we are part of a health insurance trust. So our district, as well as 6 others, belong to a collaborative trust so that we can keep our health insurance down, which has been a phenomenal asset to our school district with only a 2% health insurance increase for this school year. Our trust is doing so well by adding the clinics. We have, I think, approximately 8 clinics that our staff can go to and receive free medication, free services, etc. Our health insurance trust is so healthy at this point that we're going to be able to offer a premium holiday here in the next month or 2 for our staff and our districts. So that's fantastic news. And we hope to continue that momentum next year. And then lastly, if you happen to have a chance to either see on our website or the news, Fox News came to our school district yesterday and did 3 TV segments featuring our schools that have the book vending machines. It has been a huge success at our schools. The students are loving it and taking lots of books home and that they get to keep. And so the news cameras were here featuring the kids, and the kids were talking about it and showing all the wonderful books that they're able to access and keep. So we're promoting reading everywhere we can. And if you happen to have a chance, please check out our website as it's posted on our website. And with that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Dr. McNulty. Questions? Mr. Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. McNulty, you heard several concerns from our first public speaker. Would you care to address any of those, such as maybe busing or access to the buildings?
So the busing, again, we have an RFP out because we too have been talking about our concerns for busing. And so we have an active RFP out. And we have had three at this point so far, three bidders and maybe more, but I know three for sure. And we'll be able to score those vendors and bring forward a recommendation for a busing contract here within the next 6 weeks so that we can hopefully move in a better direction with busing services because we too are not satisfied with our current busing situation.
Well, can you be more specific, Dr. McNulty? What are the day-to-day challenges that you're having?
The day-to-day challenges that we've been experiencing this year is many routes that are not being filled with our current vendor. And we don't find out until the morning of. And so we will get a call or a text at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning on a pretty regular basis. And then we have to turn around as administration and try to contact those families to let them know that there's not a bus service. We have contracted with a separate bus company to fill those unfilled routes, which has been a cost incurred by the district. We, as you have heard me talk about in the past, we've had pastors driving for us. We have city bus passes that we've been providing, and we're also paying parents as needed to get their students to school.
Is that, the current contract holder has there been a reduction in payment to that vendor for lack of keeping its obligation to the contract?
Absolutely. We do not pay them for any unfilled routes.
Could you touch briefly, if you know, I know Nathan was the one handling furniture more generally, but there was a concern raised about the Bethune furniture and whether it was appropriate in size, and then the disposal. I know we had a long exchange at one point about how to dispose of that. If you could just refresh us on those.
Sure. The furniture is the appropriate size for preschool. We might have had a couple of preschool kids who are larger, and so we had to bring over some elementary, more kindergarten sized desks back for those students, which is totally fine, and we still had those. But the preschool furniture is appropriate for I would say 95% of those students there, and looks good, and is the classrooms are well equipped. The classroom furniture disposal was part of the contract for the companies that we bought the furniture from. They were part of the disposal process as well. So they took the furniture and disposed of it, and that was part of the contract.
Right. And I think we received some extra payment for that, if I recall.
That's correct, we did.
We weren't able to scrap or repurpose any of the furniture. We received a credit.
That script, yeah.
Yeah, we had quite a lengthy discussion on that at the
Right.
time.
I remember that. It was around, it was a while ago. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And glad to hear that the ADM is up. That's obviously encouraging news. Any indication as to what's driving that? Where the students are coming from at this point, or what brought them back to the district?
We are hopeful that it's because of our STEM certification efforts. Also, we have increased our athletics down to the elementary schools. We hired an elementary and middle school athletic coordinator. And so we have middle school athletics and elementary schools. So for this year, for the first time, we have basketball teams at all of the elementary schools, and they're able to come every Saturday and play competitively at Westside in the big gym on the Jumbotron. And all of those things have been very exciting and well publicized here within the district. There's been lots of community enthusiasm around that. So I think all of those efforts, as well as our efforts around the reading vending machines, we're really publicizing all of that. Parent camps that we're doing, transporting parents back and forth to school in our buses to have parent camps and open meetings. I think all of those are helping.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions for Dr. McNulty before we move on from this item? Okay, it sounds like we do have Ms. Coleman in position to be able to provide public comment. So let's turn to that quickly. Ms. Coleman, go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. First, I
Good
want to express concerns regarding the book vending machines. Once again, our children do not need gimmicks. They need a strong curriculum, and they need an education that will help them to succeed. When I look at Gary Middle School, this school does not have a library or a librarian. And so even if you ask yourself, which would you prefer your child have? A library with a librarian or a book vending machine? And when we look at Gary Middle School, only 0.9% of the students were proficient at English, language arts, and math. And sadly, that is a 0.3% increase from the 0.6, which were the results in 2021. When the PTA at Westside advocated for iPads, you recall the May 7, 2020 Distress Unit Appeal Board meeting, which is available on YouTube at around 104, where Eric Parrish stated Chromebooks were chosen in part because of a lower street value in comparison to iPads. But when I look at Cherry Creek, Colorado, and look at those students in elementary, they are able to get iPads. But once again, in Gary, our children aren't being given the quality of what you will want for your children. They're being given experiments and street value computers that do not enhance their education. Also, with the buses, and we have to, before I get to the buses, we do have to remember this takeover took all of our elementary schools to an F. And we look at the buses, what good is $8 million worth of furniture if our children cannot get transported to school every day on time? I would ask that DUAB not only request to look at the RFP, but we need an evaluation of how much it will cost for us to provide our own buses. If we look at Valparaiso Community Schools, they own 69 buses. There is no reason that Gary should not have its own buses to transport our children, especially when we're looking at 90.8% of the children being chronically absent at Westside based on 2022 data I received from the Department of Education. And lastly, I want to know, what is the graduation rate? I did a Freedom of Information request and was given data that it was 79.38%. When DUAB did its presentation before the Senator Mishler, the screen that Andre Wright showed had 72.1%. But actually, the numbers are conflicting between the state data and MGT data. And that is a big concern because those numbers, neither one of them are probably accurate, because I've asked for the cohort number, which is needed to calculate the correct data for graduation rates, and I've not been able to get that information. And lastly, I want to thank you for your time, but I stress to DUAB, Indiana is a home rule state. We need an elected school board in Gary, Indiana. The academic crisis in our community can only be addressed by the people who live here, who see our children every day, and who are concerned about the horrendous test scores, them not being transported to school, the fights happening in our schools, that this system has to change. I would ask you, work with us, not against us, to get an elected school board for Gary so we can come together in collaboration and not a takeover or an overseer position, so we can help our children succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Coleman. Right. That was the last person we had signed up for public comment. We'll return to our agenda. We have the financial update. Ms. Warburton is here to give us some detail on that.
Sure. Included in your package today is the January claims for our 1065 docket. For the month of January, our claims were $1,597,323.98. Inclusive of some big projects that we were finishing, our roof at Building and Grounds, as well as our theater seating. So we have received our refurbished theater seating. Currently, the floor is being worked on and it will be ready to go in the upcoming weeks. I believe we have our first performance scheduled in April, so we're on target for that as well. And then in addition, as well as the west side bleachers were completed and the middle school bleachers have begun work and repair on as well.
Thank you. Any questions regarding the 1065 report? We do have a claims docket there that we need to approve. Would entertain a motion to do so.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? To approve the claims docket as submitted. Hearing none, would you call the roll?
Ms. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Bennett,
Yes.
Mr. Joyce,
Yes.
Ms. Kabaki,
Yes. Yes.
and Mr. McGowan.
Yes.
5-0.
Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Appreciate your time. Up next, we have the academic update. We have Ms. Bradley and Mr. Wright here. Take it away.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon. Make sure.
Okay, gotcha. That's it. There we go.
Okay, so as we discussed before, and this is a revisit from our previous conversations as it relates specifically to the goals long-term and the school year. Our targets have been the recovery from COVID and work to close the gaps between Gary within the state in reading, math, and in high school graduation. And part of that for this year has been to work on accelerating student growth and proficiency to try and meet what those long-term goals are and what we've set those goals to be. And now we're going to talk about another point in the process and see where we are. So the district uses two types of assessment data. They use iReady as one measure, and it's implemented 3 times a year, and we're at the second point of implementation for that assessment. But it also, it's just begun to use common formative assessments to measure progress based on what was recently instructed. Next slide. Some headlines from the data points that we currently have, and we'll be sharing those with you. We have some students that are growing in their learning as it relates to some of their goals for the year. But as it relates specifically to proficiency, we still have average about what we did last year in the district. As it relates to the CFA common formative assessment data, that there are a significant number of students that are not yet proficient in those assessments, and you'll get a slide that shows specifically how that has played itself out. But as it relates to the work that's being done, you're not seeing what I would consider to be a headwind, right? And you'll see what I mean by that as it relates to iReady. You see some tailwind, right? Which is a good thing. Nowhere near where we expect it to be, but you don't want to see a headwind and a tailwind or all headwinds because they're going in the opposite direction. So we have assessed in January the middle year diagnostic. And as I said before, iReady is an adaptive tool that actually looks at year and grade level outcomes and how kids are progressing towards those measures. There's also typical growth and stretch growth. And the typical growth is the national average of growth for students. And then the stretch growth is adding maybe 1.5 years to that in order to see how we can accelerate them to get them even further down and closer to proficiency. I know we've talked about this before. What happens when the students take the test, right? When they take the assessment, there's a report that's given. Teachers know what that report is, students know what that report is, and you can then give students independent individual lessons. But then you can also then differentiate by what the lessons are for the students in order to give them that essential and extra opportunity to catch up from the gaps that come out of this assessment. And as I said before, we're at this particular point where we're going to be able to see specifically how students have progressed from the very beginning when they took it to where they are at this particular point. Some of the takeaways from that should be used by the system in order to figure out, okay, where are those places that we really need to double down on? And so part of that checkpoint to see it, is the plan working where do we need to adjust? And if so, how? So what I'd like to point out as it relates specifically to, our rating and the proficiency data. So, if you were actually to add, and this came directly from the vendor, but if you were to add reading from last year, those data points actually add up to 99%. They don't add up to 100. Then the math adds up to 101 and not necessarily 100. So it's off a percent for whatever reason. But if you take a look at the chart for reading, you'll see that there's a reduction in the number of students that are in this red space, being 2 to 3 or more grade levels behind from where they were this time last year. And then you'll also see, if you look to the far left, where you look at mid or early on grade level, you'll see that there was an increase from 8% up to 20% of students that are further along this continuum than they were from last year. You can also see some of the same trajectory for math. Nowhere near where we want students to be, but you do see, as I said before, a tailwind of students moving from this category to 2 to 3 grade levels behind, moving closer to mid or at grade level.
Help me understand, what was the time period that this 4% movement into from the right to the left? Was the time period that happened
In which particular category?
in the reading?
Yeah, so this is the diagnostic was taken in January, right? So last year's diagnostic, I think it might have been taken around that same time, or,
So, yes,
Yeah.
we always take the middle at the same time.
So you got the results back from this past January already?
Yes,
That's what this is.
this is what it
yeah,
was.
that's what this is.
Thank you.
Yeah,
But then what you have across the bottom there are last year's.
those are last year's numbers.
Right.
Okay.
So they're supporting what you said, general, we're ahead of where we were last year in general, but
This, just to clarify, last year, are we saying the start of this school year? Or are we saying, right, so it's not 12 months ago, it's September. So going from 2, 6, 36, 24, 31 to 7, 13, 33, 20, 22.
Yes, it's not 2021, 2022. It's on 2022. So this is
So from the start of the school
from
year
the
to.
fall.
Okay, from your fall assessment.
I see.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
It would be interesting to compare where we were at this point last year, right? If we're trying to sort of see how are we doing compared to where we were last year? Is that a meaningful comparison?
Well, it would be more meaningful if we looked at cohorts. Okay, so if we look at student to student, the students have progressed in grade changes, but you still want to see how is the student progressing through the system, right? I think that's a better measure to determine progress, because if it's third grade this year, third grade last year, that's not apples to apples.
Right.
Kids in third grade.
Different students.
Right, kids that moved on, but you want to look at students and how they progress through the system.
Okay.
Thank you for allowing me to.
Oh, no.
You advance the slide. This slide here looks specifically at typical growth and the progress that we've seen since the beginning of the school year. And so again, the typical growth goal is a national average growth for students at that placement and grade level. And so if we just isolate reading, for instance, and you see the 51% to the right, what it looks at is our median students, so all of the students who took the test, that middle student is gaining typical growth progress by 51% in reading. So you would have half of the students gaining more than that percentage and half gaining less than. Same thing for math. The median student score is at 45%, meeting their typical growth progress thus far at the middle of the school year. That typical growth progress is a score for the entire year though. And so in reading, our students have met that 50% median progress for the most part. And in math, we've missed it by some, but this is showing that there's some on track happening in reading, and math has been trailing, and we have some ideas on what to do to to catch those students up as well.
And just to be clear, that's on track for growth. So if I started third grade with a first grade level of understanding,
Yes,
I'm on track. 50% of the kids are on track to be where they should be at the end of first grade by the end of third grade.
50% of the students or more are at least 51% or more toward their typical growth. So each student is.
Whatever the growth would be for a kid starting at that. point,
Yes, because.
What would we expect to see the typical kid grow to? It's not necessarily 51% of our kids are on track to be where we would want them to be
Yeah.
at the end of the grade.
That's not what this shows.
Right.
This shows that your median student is progressing at 51% in reading and 45% in math. And like you were saying before, so each student is assigned what their typical growth would be based on what grade they're taking the test when they enter and at what scale score they come in. So it's not
Yeah.
already doesn't give you like, it has to be a 455 at the end of the year. It's so individualized to each student that it's gonna depend on what scale score I came in at and what grade level I'm in at the time.
Got it.
And the target is actually based upon how far behind they are. So,
Right.
so if you're just one grade level behind, you know, you've got something to go. And the actual growth we're targeting is long, you know, the further some student behind, the higher the target is. So
But not necessarily all of the gap.
that's correct. We don't expect
Yeah,
them to fall
right,
back.
exactly, which is why we also look at stretch growth, which I think is the next slide, because that stretch growth gets at closing more gaps. And so again, the stretch growth is determined by where the student starts as well, where they will meet their typical growth, what a typical student and coming in at that level would get to by the end of the year, and then some would be the stretch growth. And so there are some students who may have to reach their typical and stretch growth for a couple of years before the gap is completely closed. And so what I already looks at is that about 20% of students meet their stretch growth each year. And so thus far, we have 10% meeting their stretch growth already mid-year, so
Okay.
they've already met their stretch growth.
So possible that we'll see a 20% that don't match national,
Hopefully, that's what we're looking for. And then 6% have met that in math.
maybe not.
So they're, yeah. Okay, next slide. And so there are some, things to look at since the beginning of the school year. And what we thought might be important is to look at the differentiation, which is one of our focus areas for the school year, and whether or not we are meeting the needs of students at every level. And so for reading, what you see is students who are, well, for both sides. Students who entered the school year at either mid or above, early on grade level, one grade level below, 2 or 3 or more. So it looks at where the students started and where they are now. So mid-year, we see that the most growth that we see are in students who were 3 to more grade levels below. They're showing an increase in their typical growth by 40%, the most of all of those entering levels. And that's generally what you want to see, is that those students behind, we know that they are making those gains that we want to see.
So that would mean, I just want to make sure I understand that. So say 68% are meeting their typical growth.
40% are meeting their typical growth. So that's, it's a little confusing. That 68% is back to that median score. So the middle student at that level, 3 or more grade levels below across the entire district, is scoring at a 68% toward their typical growth. That's what that first column shows.
They're
The
more
second,
than, but it's fair to say they're more than halfway towards the typical growth we would expect to see
for that,
at this time in the
yes, that is it.
from where they were placed, from where they start, from where they're.
And what we see is that they started 3 or more grade levels below. Because that's the group that we were isolating. And then if we look at our students who came in mid or above grade level, 18% of them have already met their typical growth. But we see that the median student in that group has not yet made that goal toward typical, right? Which tells us a little bit about how overall we're doing with individualized instruction. We have some slides that shows some drill down into that individualized instruction, but they are meeting, typical and even some stretch growth. But we contend that there might be areas of still needed, improvement in the individualized instruction for all of our students. Because what happens is when you have students that come in 3 or more grade levels below, of course, those are the students who you want to make certain are caught up and that they're being attended to. And sometimes that can result in students who come in already prepared to not get all of the attention that they need. But the focus for us has been everyone getting what they need across the board.
So looking at mid or above grade level, I just want to make sure I understand that again. So this is saying a median student has made 0% of progress towards
Their typical growth.
their typical growth.
Right. So what it
So
means is
that
that
means they haven't moved from where they were, the median student hasn't moved from where they were at the beginning of the year.
and to some degree, they may have made more than 0%. Because so your median kids, so if you spread out all of the kids, the one that's right there in the middle, theirs is 0%. There may be some other students who are progressing a little bit more than that, but that median student and below. So what that tells us is at least half of those kids that came in at that level are not yet meeting their annual typical growth. However, 18% of them have already had.
So it doesn't mean they haven't grown
No.
from where they were. They're just not meeting the progress we would expect
At this time,
at this time.
yes.
And so maybe that just drilling down a little bit deeper. When you think about the context of Gary and the population of students that we have, where a large majority or a large plurality of the students we have come in behind, I imagine our teachers spend a lot of time teaching behind grade level rather than on grade level. And those students then at the cutting edge, so to speak, there just aren't as many opportunities to challenge them perhaps.
Which is why our focus shifted to small group differentiated instruction so that all of the students are growing because these children in the early on and the mid, if we do not attend to their needs, there can be some slippage
They
in
end up
those
falling behind.
skills. And so and so that's why a big push this year has been around small group instruction. So that, yes, the students at the bottom are getting what they need, but also all of the students on the strata are receiving the instruction that they deserve.
So how much time do kids spend in that small group instruction versus all in,
Yeah,
big
so
district?
our goal for this year has been during the reading block, which is 90 minutes, and that's what the state requires. And also during the math block, which is generally an hour. However, small group instruction can occur all day long. And what usually happens in classrooms that are doing this well, that is occurring throughout the day. There are other classrooms, as you can imagine, where this is a new instructional concept, and they receive that instruction during those specified times.
Okay.
So we have some training that is happening and some coaching to support teachers in those ventures.
Andre, is
I'm sorry.
this where you say, when you say there are headwinds? This is what these are the headwinds. It's that we have kids, our top kids, so to speak, aren't making as much progress as we perhaps like to see. And there's a lot of reasons for that perhaps, but.
Yeah, and you see it in the data, right? You expect to see acceleration, and sometimes you see they stay where they are. I don't want to say stagnation, but they're right where they were when they came in, even though they are well above striking distance to move forward. But that becomes part of the skill and the dynamic of taking that classroom where you have so many different variables and then merging that together with time and with actual rigor in your in what you're asking from the task perspective to get these students in order to move them forward and accelerate. It's a delicate balance when you're faced with so many kids that are behind. And you have to create the space within your instructional day to give kids who need the acceleration the opportunity to be accelerated. And that comes with training, right? And teaching teachers how to be able to
Teaching teachers how to do.
and not not giving worksheets, not giving one-off assignments to do that, but interacting in such a way that lifts the level of rigor for them, even within the concept itself.
And I think that training it started this year, well, actually, it started last year, but the side-by-side support around small group instruction, got off the ground this year. And as you know, just if it's something new for folks to be able to do in their classrooms, you're not gonna necessarily see the result of that in a couple of months. However, we are seeing areas across the district where teachers are very successful in implementing small group differentiated instruction. And you can see that in the data too, and I believe that the next
Okay,
2 slides show that.
I'm gonna go, Rebecca, I'll come back to you. I'm gonna go to Wes first.
Okay.
He raised his hand.
Yeah, I'll raise my hand. Can you extrapolate with, on the reading side, the 3 or more grade levels below? Can you extrapolate based on that? And I'm gonna say limited information because it's fairly new. How long it will take those folks or those students to, become proficient at grade level, or is it too early to tell?
I would say it's too early, and then the other thing is, it depends on the student, it depends on the environment that they're in for instruction, how much support they receive at home. You know, there's so many different variables, where there could be a student who does start off 3 or more levels below, and in a couple of years are able to meet their stretch growth and are able to close those gaps and are at the level where you would want them to be. But it really depends on so many different variables that I don't even think that I really would, speculate.
Thank you.
Rebecca.
I just have a question. It's so confusing. Everything that we've been talking about the last 5-10 minutes about meeting goals, stretch goals, all this stuff. How does the average parent understand how their child is doing? There's lots of statistics, lots of data, but the average parent just wants to know how much progress has my child made, and giving them all of this information, the charts, the data, all that stuff. I'm having trouble understanding it. How do you relate to the parent?
It's a good question. So the parents receive a parent report from iReady that does not have all of this academic jargon on it. It does have where the student started, and there is an arrow, a chart that says, here's where your child began the year, here's where your child is at the middle after taking that assessment. And then it also has kind of like, you can see clearly the trajectory, whether or not it's stagnant, whether or not it's going backwards. A lot of times that's not the case, and how far the student is from making or closing that gap. So what I can do, we can share some of the parent, there's not any in this presentation, but there are parent reports and examples of such on the iReady website. But they are very parent friendly. And then we also have parent meetings. The last parent meeting occurred a couple weeks ago, just after the MOY testing, and it was all around iReady, iLearn, all of the assessment pieces that students are taking, and the instructional coaches for each building and the parent liaisons went through those topics with parents, because you're right, this can be very confusing.
Thank you.
And so there were a couple of bright spots that we wanted to share with everyone, and one of around this iReady middle of the year data. And one of them is here for Bailey School. This is our STEM Academy. And what you see, it's the same chart, but you see that our median student is reaching their typical growth, or growth toward typical progress toward typical growth at 77%. So the median student at that school, when we tease out all the reading scores, is meeting and exceeding the 50% by 77%. So that means that 50% of the students are even closer than that. And the same trend in math, though a little bit lower, the median student score is at 69%, reaching that typical growth mid-year. And some of the things that were done at Bailey to address some of the issues that they were having is that there was a schedule change to allow for more instructional time. There was also a quicker turnaround with supporting teachers around small group instruction. They went from 10 periods to 6 periods. Their coaches are working well in PLCs and assessment data, and this school is our STEM-focused school. And so we wanted to bring that forward because there are some very bright spots when students are, the attention is at every student and what they need. Yeah, that's a slide. The same slides then from what we looked at earlier, but at Bailey again, we see that the mid or above grade level students, or the students who came in the fall at that level, that median student score is at 213%. So they met and exceeded the median student, their annual typical growth, and 50% of them have already met annual typical growth. And 50% of those students have met their annual stretch growth. So we see some really good movement at this school for students in almost all levels here. So the mid and above, the early on have showed some progress. You see the most at the mid or above though. And then you see our 3 or more grade levels below are also meeting their annual typical growth at 49% and the annual stretch growth at 14%. So just wanted to bring out some of those areas where a focus on student needs specifically and differentiated shows that they're able to meet the growth and also are able to meet those proficiency that we're looking for, starting to meet the proficiency.
I want to ask a question as I look at the data. So let's take reading at the 213% for mid or above grade level. So the median student
Yeah.
in reading who was mid or above grade level, we don't know how many kids that was.
Yes, in this one, it doesn't show it, but we do have access to that.
I've read it, yeah, but here, that median student has already made in half a year 2 grade levels of progress. Is that how I should interpret 213?
I don't know that we should say 2 grade levels. It's just that they met and exceeded by that much. 100% would be met.
That would be growth for the whole year.
Yes, yeah.
So they've done more than what they were expected to, they've done more than double what they were expected to
Yes.
hit in a year, based on where they started.
And at
Which
the,
for these kids was pretty much at grade level.
yes,
These are kids starting at grade level.
they
So
were mid or above, yes.
presumably you expect the kids at grade level to make a grade level of progress in a year.
Right.
So
And
they may have made 2 years of progress or
in half a year.
in half a year.
And what you can see even more reliably is that 50% of them have met their typical growth. So wherever they started, how we talked before, they are assigned, well, this is your typical growth for the year, that 50% of them have met that, and 50% of them have met their annual stretch growth. So they are meeting and exceeding where they were at the beginning of the school year.
That's interesting.
And if we look over at math, because we can't ignore the math, we are seeing some increases in the early on grade level and the 3 or more grade levels below, but we see that those mid or above grade level students in math are not quite meeting and exceeding where we
How
want.
many kids are in that category? Knowing that math is an area of challenge for
Yeah.
good schools more generally.
I don't, right in front of us, have those numbers, I have access to them, but when this was created, that piece was cut off.
I'm just curious, is that 1 kid, 2 kids?
No, this is more like about, I want to say like 61 students.
Oh, okay.
About 60, because this is the entire school.
Yeah. I just know that we've had middle school math has been
Yes,
an area of challenge.
it has been. One of the issues too is just, and this is not just Gary or even Indiana, gaining and retaining actual math teachers. People with training in not just math, like you may have a math background, but you have a math instructional background. Yes. And so that has been a challenge, and sometimes you see that in math. And then that is just one of those areas where if you don't have that background, it's harder to help the student.
And I know we haven't had tons of time with data to know exactly why it's doing well, but just when I'm looking at the left side screen, that reading those above grade level are doing great and early on, not the same. And so I flipped on that. So it's like, what caused that? Is it something with just the kids' interests? Is it something with This is the same school, so you wouldn't think that there'd be a lot of variation in environment, but, you know, just-
Yeah, math at secondary is more departmentalized though, so you don't have the, you know, at elementary, you may have one person teaching all of the subjects, even though people generally have or tend to have an area of focus. You know, even I was an elementary teacher, I was luckily able to kind of teach, well, not everybody's able to do that. And in secondary, you have reading focused folks and then math specialized teachers, and so that may be. And then another bright spot in the next slide is at one of our elementary schools. That median student, again, we're looking at is reaching typical growth mid-year at 65%. So we have half of the students meeting their typical growth at more than 65%. And one of the things that's happening at Banneker is that teachers are implementing small groups with the fidelity that we want to see across the district. And we're very pleased about that. Another look at, Banneker in the next slide just looks at, again, their proficiency scores and their baseline placement scores. And so if we look over at their reading proficiency, students came in, if we just look at the green there, the early on and mid or above, 10% of our students fell in that area. And mid-year, we have 26%. So there was some growth in proficiency as well. And we can see, like what Andre was speaking of, a shortening of those numbers of students or percentages of students who were in the red at the beginning of the school year versus now. So we don't have those students falling out of even the yellow into the green. We have students moving in the right trajectory. And this shows the proficiency side. And then again, their placement, baseline placement growth, you can see more of a striata and the numbers that the percentage of students showing typical growth both at the mid or above grade level and at the below are pretty much consistent. And that shows that focus on differentiated small group instruction where everyone is growing at the rate that we want them to be growing.
So this is this baseline, the Banneker growth, you're showing that. That's reading and math together.
No, this one is just reading.
This is just-
So what we wanted to do, yeah, these are some of the bright spots. And for Banneker, the same was not, I don't think it was,
We weren't seeing the same.
it wasn't terrible, yeah, but it wasn't, we weren't seeing the same. Showcase positive if we can refocus.
It's interesting that the small group dynamic, at least to me, sure it's not the end all be all, but he did make a point of it. Banneker saying that they were, I take this as saying that the small group, done correctly, could possibly produce results quicker.
I think that it could produce results quicker because when instruction is just at base level or even lower level, a lot of times the students who are not at that level, they're not challenged. The rigor is too low for them. And so though they may be compliant, they may be completing assignments, their ability to grow is not quite tapped into. And so you want all of the students, because the students on iLearn who are going to be our students to pass a grade level specific assessment are going to be your early on grade level, your mid and above grade level students. Because the test at the end of the year is not testing on the growth throughout the year. It is going to be a third grade test or fourth grade test. And so you want to make certain that those students are receiving what they need. All of them, but yeah.
But small groups has been implemented in all schools.
Yes, yes. And this is just an example of one with the type of fidelity that we want to see. So it is being implemented in all of the schools, and there may have been some bright spots, you know, when we pulled out some different grade levels. But at Banneker, it was just clear overall, and the level of fidelity was there, and you could see the results.
Thank you.
At one point in time, we were talking about growth, the ability to regain and maintain knowledge. And it was brought up that attendance was maybe one of the bigger factors of, if you're not there, you can't learn. And I mean, are we making any progress in attendance at the schools? And when you look at these as like some of the schools that are gaining ground, I mean, are we, is the attendance increasing at those schools as opposed to the other schools? Or is the attendance still, you know, one of the major factors to not getting them there and not being able to educate them if they're not there? Because they're gonna be part of the negative numbers within these reports, I'm pretty sure.
I would say, so this time we did a report on our general, benchmark areas that we normally do, and attendance is one of them. But I would say that our issue with transportation happens district-wide.
Well, I'm not necessarily talking about just transportation. I mean, I'm just talking about attendance in general.
Yeah.
I mean, not being there, truancy, not being, not just not being, not showing up.
Okay.
Having the ability to show up, just not showing up.
Yeah, I think that at these schools, these are our K through eighth grade schools. For the most part, our families do rely though on the transportation that we provide. And in areas that, when that doesn't happen, our parents do, like our attendance is generally in the 80%, 89. Our goal is 90. We've been close, but not exactly at 90% at different schools. I'd have to go back and look at specifically Banneker and Bailey because I don't have that data.
I was wondering how that
Yeah.
transfers
I think
to
it's a good point.
growth.
Yeah, I think it, you know, I caution all of us from being so predictive, because you don't have the end yet, right? But if you're not there, obviously you're not gonna learn, right? And so that's a common denominator. If you're not in front of teachers, you're not in front of your support, you're gonna miss those opportunities. But then also, we still have another mark, that's getting ready to happen in the district, and that's gonna be I read and then I learn, right? And so, once you get that, then you gotta backwards map that data to see, did we move the way we expected to move? If we didn't, then what's the analysis that comes forth? How close was this data to help us as a leading indicator, or is it not a leading indicator? There's a lot of questions that the system is going to have to answer once this test is administered, okay? So I mean, it's easy to see 200 and something %, but yet you still have a mechanism that's gonna come out, that's gonna ask for something that I already just can't give us, and that's the writing component. Right? It does not provide us with an insight to that. And that's one of the 3 domains that our students are going to be assessed on. It's not here, but it's coming. And we have to be prepared for that too.
Fully acknowledge what you said about not being predictive, because we had this conversation last year with that, but specific to urban literacy, like, do we have any indication of are we improving in those efforts of that foundation of?
You know, I think we're putting an effort for it, right? And you'll see, I think as I go into even with the CFAs, how even though we're lifting out specific domains, you're not getting the stairs going up. You're getting the stairs, some of this, right? And so you want to see stairs moving. You want to see yourself going upstairs when you see bar graphs, but you don't necessarily see that. You see some go up, some go down, and so forth. And so those lead back into what is it? Is it the level of the assessment that's causing students not to be able to access like we want to see? Or in those cases where you see the stairs going up, then what's happening in that grade level is causing that to happen? So it's still, with all the newness that's happening in the system, I think it's going to be really important that once we get all the data back, because there are new initiatives that people are just getting used to, right? That we then do a deep dive to say, let's go through and see, right, what were the real root causes of how we moved or how we didn't move.
Well, like anything else, it's an iterative process, right?
Absolutely.
We should be refining our model over time, no expectation that we get it all right at the first time. No one size fits all solution. So we should be looking for those, and that data should drive those decisions, right?
Absolutely. And right, not only from a task perspective, but what are the practices that came out of Bailey, or what are the practices that came out of Banneker? What are the practices that we can point back to see how they scored out, right? But that comes after you go through the process and be able to fall back, even down to the classroom level, right? That's where you, That's where you're really gonna find.
Well, you gotta find out which teachers are doing it well and which aren't, and then how do you support the ones who aren't doing it as well, and aren't as successful?
Right, and that's where the professional learning communities and those discussions happen at the grade level. And the instructional coaches support, along with the administrators too, those teachers who may need that additional support. And that is in turn.
Yeah, and what will, if we find teachers that really have accelerated learning in their classroom, then they become the model, right? That we can use throughout the system as a professional development opportunity to say, how did you do it? How were the techniques that you use? Now they can become even more of a leader within the system itself. It's very difficult sometimes to bring someone in, another teacher that doesn't teach students that might have that same dynamic and then say, you need to do this.
Right.
Versus saying, here's someone that's right here.
I'm doing it.
That's doing it with the students that are in our building.
And then we're
And then right here in our grade level, right? So that becomes that model that you can use. Because it suspends disbelief, right? Yeah, maybe you can do it out here, but I'm dealing with it.
Yeah, that's really nice theory, but
Absolutely.
make it work.
Absolutely.
On the writing component, you make a really great point, and I'm thinking back to your analysis on typing and the impact. Or kids can't be good writers if they can't be good typers, because the test is testing them on typing in addition to writing. How are we addressing not only that gap, but how are we testing that gap? How do we know if we're getting better at that? Do we have programming in place then?
Yeah, I mean, many of the schools, since we started having those conversations around what the data was speaking to, started to implement opportunities within their core day to get kids to go online with examples, actually from the Department of Ed, right? The released items or prompts, so that they're working through those. So they have introduced those to the grade levels that are gonna be assessed and having them work through that process. I don't have that data in front of me right now to say, here's how they did on the first one, second, because there's a scoring mechanism that goes along with.
So it comes with some scoring too, so we can get feedback on how much.
Absolutely.
Right, and a lot of times you have to model for students before you just say, go do this or that. And so a lot of the modeling phases occur before we get the let's now test the student for those.
Is typing a regular part of the curriculum in Gary schools for elementary kids?
I would say that.
Computer, I mean, obviously they have Chromebooks, but
And
are we really not?
they utilize the Chromebook often for those types of activities, especially with the writing. There is a Project Lead the Way class at every elementary school that deals with those kinds of things. But a lot of discussion around time away from actual content versus how do you put in the typing practice.
How do you build that?
But that can easily be homework, those kinds of activities. And teachers are, I think, addressing them a different way. Just being, afraid to come away from actual content instruction and spending time on it.
Well, I think about my own children's experience, and they've had a computer class since first grade, I think. And you can see that benefit. So the point that you make about typing, I mean,
I won't back away.
it's pervasive.
I won't back away. It's national,
You
right?
know how to use a pencil, and you have to know how to use a keyboard.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
If you don't, it sends a misrepresentation regarding a district's proficiency.
Right.
Okay, it does.
Right.
You see 80% of a district that is below proficiency in an area called writing, when in fact they're typing, and you don't address it, your scale score will not change, and your proficiency data will stay where it is.
It's up here. I gotta get it out of here.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that the kids can't write.
Can't mean they can't do
It
it.
doesn't mean that they can't transfer that thought. It's the mechanism that they're being asked to do that.
Right.
It's completely different than what they do during the school day.
Right. Okay, thank you.
So plans, moving forward, right? We've heard of some bright spots, and the district will continue to focus and help train teachers and schools on how to be effective in small groups. And the leaders will help support and learn as well of what that process, when it's done with fidelity, looks like, and the examples that come out of that as it relates to artifacts. And then teachers will be doing the same thing. And so part of that process is to double down on what you've already been doing, hopefully that we can continue to see it directly attributable to increases in student achievement. some of the new efforts, and I think, Kim can speak to this, there was a contract for incentives for teachers to actually incorporate more differentiation, as a way to make sure that the district's initiative has some additional support to make sure the teachers are actually doing that. There's been some, increase in improved practices for side-by-side coaching, through, ed direction, as well as CFA data, and that's what, I'm going to talk about right now. So if you go to the next slide. So one of the things that the district has begun to take on is this common formative assessment, where we're asking questions of students right after after you teach a unit, in order to see what the proficiency is for the students as it relates to what's been taught. I already is looking at year end, right? So you're going down this long path, and the CFAs are built to say, well, how'd you do on this particular unit? The district lifted out just two components for both math and reading. They lifted out number sets and computation for math. And then they lifted out literacy and nonfiction for reading. And they asked a specific set of questions based on both, in both the elementary as well as middle school. Some of the data that you'll see that the majority of the students based on that, and just take a look at the elementary school, the majority of students are not at the level of efficiency that we want to see. And they, in either unit, right? You do see some improvements in some places where fourth grade may have increased from 5% in unit 1 to 11% in unit 2. But then you look at fifth, you get the complete opposite. And the same thing with math foundations. And some of that is around the complexity of the items and the tasks that they're being asked to respond to. And some of that is also, right, that the level of rigor between unit and unit increases.
It's interesting to see that math is actually exceed, the proficiency in math exceeds the proficiency in reading, which is reversed from what
It's
we
a reverse.
generally see.
Right.
That's fine.
And if you take a look at the next slide, even for middle school, for unit 1 and unit 2, and reading for comprehension, remember they lifted out comprehension for both, right, for both units. And then number 6 for math. So if you take a look, you'll see even in 8th grade, there was a big drop between unit 1 and unit 2. There was a big increase in 7th grade from unit 1 and unit 2. And if you look at reading on the opposite end, it's still not where we expect it to be. And so I want to just stress to you all, there's an analysis that has to take place when you have to bring all of your data sources together. Okay? Once the information comes back from the state assessment, then we have to pull every item that we used for the CFAs to see, are they actually assessing at the same level of rigor that we expected to see and the students are going to be facing on that test, and determine from an item analysis, is there something else that we need to do that might start to shift the district more into a leading indicator with their assessment data versus where we are right now. It's a new process for the system. A lot of work that has to go back into it once we get to this point, which is your state assessment. And then say, okay, now how do we work back from here?
I think just to add to that, there are some changes to some of the state standards, as you may be aware of, and so some of this is going to change based on that. So we'll be looking at the new standards that are left, standards that are changing, to what degree is the rigor different, and to what degree then do these CFAs need to change as well.
Yeah.
So this is new, as Andre said, for the district, and then there are some additional changes just so that we are responding to the state changes in the state standards as well.
How does this relate, and thinking about the sort of a process we've outlined here several months ago around taking these unit assessments and then reteaching based on, okay, we haven't reached where we want to be, we're gonna take a period to reteach, reassess. Is that happening?
It does happen, and just like to these, that they are new, I think some of the reteaching and the degree, the depth of knowledge at that level is one of the areas where we're having our instructional coaches, principals, and teachers meeting around. Because what often happens is, or what has happened, is that sometimes that reteach is not at the same level. So the I Learn assessment is generally at a BOK of 3 or 4. And if your instruction, these common formative assessments are more retail type questions, you get that the students are getting it, but it's at a different level. But you haven't asked at the correct level of difficulty or.
Yeah, and then because part of the reassessment, right? So the reassessment is not necessarily something new. If the level of questioning is at the appropriate DOK level, you ask the same question, right? You ask the same question because you're not lowering what your expectations are. But you have to spend that time to reteach and understanding what are the item analysis and what are the problems of practice that happen that will cause a student to make this error, right? But then you have to do that together. And you have to sit with students and say, here's how we tried to solve that particular problem. Where was the error, right? And then how do you go back and teach what that looks like in order for the next time they see that assessment, then you can see an adjustment. This, when you do that, would have shown both, right? Like this is the initial assessment, how kids did, and then when you go back in, and when you get to that point, you show how kids either grew or what happened in the assessment.
Your questions on this data presentation? Really appreciate this. This is good information, lots to digest here and more to digest, I think, as we continue to go. I do want to follow up on a couple of things that were asked just in the academic domain. Talk about the graduation rate a little bit. I think the disparity between the two graduation rates that we talked about, there's a 79% graduation rate and a 72, is the difference between a 4-year and a 5-year graduation rate, if I've got that right.
The other thing is when the discussions were had, because, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Because our official graduation rate is 79.38%, but it gets audited throughout the school year. And so I don't think the audit was even done this year. I think the state kept lagging behind a little bit. And I don't think we got a definitive until somewhere in November.
What would you say official? Is that a 5-year rate or a 4-year rate?
I think those rates are generally combined in that 79.38. I want to say that one is both, because even though the children get that extra 5, that, those students who get that summertime to come back and reassess, you're wrong, but I truly believe that their numbers become the overall graduation rate that's reported for our district.
And obviously what we care about is that a kid graduates. It takes them an extra year to do it.
Oh, yeah.
We prefer they do it before. What we want
Right.
to see.
And what that 5th year looks like is like the summer courses that they may have to take. And they have an ability to take a couple, I believe, in September and October.
Okay.
So they could still graduate with their class because they've taken summer school classes and so on.
Absolutely.
What about library at the middle school? Is that accurate? There's not a library at one of the middle schools?
So there are there are 2 librarians, I believe, in our district.
Okay.
And that's something that we inherited. And I think it was a cost savings kind of thing a few years ago. And then librarians are not coming out of school with school-based librarian degrees.
Right, well, libraries are
Yes.
becoming antiquated all by
They are.
themselves.
However, we have talked about, and this may come before you soon, duplicating a library that we have at one of our elementary buildings. And so the way that they do that, though, is they have a paraprofessional who is the librarian, but because that paraprofessional is paid out of federal dollars, they cannot be in a classroom or a space along with the students. They have to be under the direct supervision of a teacher. And so it becomes a space where the teacher goes into the library with the students. The librarian, which is a paraprofessional, has the books that the students may want. And so what we're looking at is duplicating that at both the elementary buildings and the middle schools. And so that would mean, purchasing the books from libraries.
Okay.
And switching over some folks to paraprofessionals so that they can help us with that. Because we do of course, want to support the literacy of our students, which is why we did the book, vending machines, which is a way to get students, and they're very excited about those. They earn tokens to you to buy those books. And then we also have, classroom libraries that are, based on student interest in those things as well. But, that was an idea that came up when we have been discussing around duplicating what we have in one of the elementary buildings. It was just something that principal and that team felt they really wanted to have a traditional library. And so we're looking at that.
So the middle school, it's accurate to say they don't have a traditional library in the sense that there's a place you go and there are books are racked on shelves.
Right. What they have right now is a STEM, library or STEM lab at one of the middle schools, at Bailey. And then at the other school, there is a library space. There's no librarian. And there are some books there, whether or not it's used in the traditional way right now.
In the middle schools traditionally have classroom library, and we've authorized some contracts to apply that in elementary schools. Is that in the middle school?
Yes, especially in, again, they're departmentalized, so especially in the English courses, yes, they have classroom library.
What about the high school? We have a high school library?
Yeah, that's actually where we have a licensed librarian is at our high school. And I also know that there's some discussions around utilizing some of the ESSER funds to update that library as well.
More books.
But yeah, books and, state of the art,
Sure. Technology.
facilities and technology.
As the education world, as far as libraries, to computer-based libraries where you log in, check out books through the computers, I mean, do your schools have access to those kind of avenues? So if I was a middle school student to be able to log into a library, it's electronic and check out a book and read it through an electronic means?
So they have that, but through the curriculum that we purchase. So the curricular pieces that we have all have online, not just the books that you utilize for the instruction, but also library students, especially for K-8 in the ELA courses.
So they would be able to log on, do research through that, would be able to write papers or
Read books even.
read books.
Yes, through their devices. Now, Gary Public Library does not at this moment have that ability, but I know Lake County, which other counties across the state probably have too, but Lake County has that, and our students can get library cards and utilize that as well.
And one other topic, a couple of individuals brought up Chromebooks versus iPads. Our recollection is the vast majority of Indiana schools use Chromebooks.
Right.
Very few use iPads. Are the Chromebooks adequate and appropriate for the instructional needs of teachers? Is that what you're hearing? Are they fitting the instructional model that the teachers are engaging in?
I would say yes. iPads, Apple, just a little quirky, and sometimes they don't play as well with different, like the texting that occurs at the state level. The Chromebooks that we have are much better for those. I would say that they are able to do the things that they need to do for learning using the Chromebooks. And it's not like to a lesser degree. Right. Most students in Indiana utilize Chromebooks.
My children have Chromebooks, and frankly, I think it's better because it's more like a computer. An iPad is.
Very specific.
The interface, the typing function is different. It's not really geared towards some of these other tools that we need, right?
Right.
Appreciate that. Other questions on academics? Appreciate the robust discussion today. Thank you. Next, we will turn to, we have several contracts, two that were authorized by Mr. Miller since our last meeting, and then we have one for our consideration that Ms. Wolverton will present. Mr. Miller?
So the first contract was for playground equipment at Banner Elementary. That's with the Kid Stuff's Play Systems. That's the same vendor that we've done at elementary schools across the district. That was purchased through SRO 3 funds, which was on a plan that the board's approved already. The vendor was procured through Education Service Center, just a hair under $200,000, $199,984. Then the second was for classroom libraries. At January's meeting, you actually approved classroom libraries for the elementary schools. This is for secondary, grades 6 through 12. Same vendor, Scholastic. Also through SB3 funds, also through the Education Service Center. And the total cost for those materials were $126,790. Cents, and to the point Mr. Joyce just brought up, there is some digital component of that as well. So some hard copy books, some access digitally. So
And are those, I mean, to the discussion we were just having, are those classroom libraries or are those for the?
No, those are classroom libraries.
Those are
We haven't
classroom.
presented the other idea yet. I mean, it's in the making, but it hasn't.
Great. So, questions on those two contracts for Mr. Miller or the district? Thank you. Finally, we have the Jason Mechanical Corp, the West Side Leadership Academy chiller contract. Ms. Fullerton is here to present that to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of our last few HVAC and plumbing improvements that we've made separate from 1065 at West Side Academy for a complete chiller replacement and installation. We did go out to bid for this as well. Jason Mechanical Corporation is the recommended vendor. This will be dual funded through the majority of ESSER 2 at $350,000 and then 1065 as well for $167,000.
Great. Questions on this contract, Mr. Bennett?
This may not be a fair question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. You were very specific about the type of chiller you wanted. I'm curious to know how that, all the way down to the bottom.
A great question. I'm sure our building and grounds director would know better the answer to that. West Side, I think due to how large it is and the capacity, I think that was probably the best fitted model based on size. I'm not even going to try to further
He can get back, he
explain.
can
It might
get,
be
he can
out
get
of
back
place
to me
to go.
about that.
Excellent answer.
He can get back to me about that. Do I understand correctly that the current chiller does not work, or did I misread that?
It is working. I believe there's a backup as well. So it would be to replace the main primary chiller. And then the backup, I believe, only needed like a water tower cooling update, which was a minimal expense that will absorb through 1065.
And I noticed that you were going to check for asbestos. Has that been done? Is there gonna be any?
I believe it has, and I would think if it is, it's inclusive of the
Okay.
scope of work.
And this price was good for 30 days, and that 30 days is up today. Have you checked with your vendor to make sure that that price is still good?
They're still holding the price for us.
And it's almost a year turnaround time, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
and I know you don't quantify this, but we spoke about buying, and we're hoping to have some utility savings as well.
Yes. I was hopeful that this year we would see some of them in our facilities that we have made improvements, but we've had a very warm winter, of course. So I would like another full year to kind of dive into analyzing what our actual utility cost savings is. But yes, West Side alone, the new chilling system will be a huge improvement.
As we, sorry,
Go ahead.
as we enter this cold weather still, and, we think through the spring and hopefully warmer, hotter temperatures, and every year we run into where we don't have air conditioning in the classrooms. Do you have any classrooms still that will not have air conditioners come this time of year whenever the heat rises?
I think every building has been addressed in some fashion, including whether it's been window units or air conditioning itself, because there are older buildings that are not retrofitted for actual air conditioning type of systems. But I believe everything has been addressed. I know this past start of the school year, we had no issues at all. We haven't had any roof leaking issues as well. I mean, HVAC and plumbing, every improvement we've made, there has not been anything that's stopped us from either starting school or having school.
It's great to hear.
Other questions regarding the chillers contract? Not a cold crowd for this one. All right, with that, I would entertain a motion. I'm glad somebody got that.
Yeah.
I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion that we accept the proposal from Jason Mechanical Corporation and in the amount of $517,000, not to exceed, for the installation on at West Side High School for their chiller replacement.
The motion, is there a second? A motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? All right, please call the roll.
Ms. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
Mr. Joyce,
Yes.
Ms. Kabaki,
Yes. Yes.
Mr. McCaffrey,
Yes.
5-0.
Passes 5-0. Thank you. Is there any new business to come before the board today? Okay. Hearing none, thank you all for your time here today. Appreciate the presentations and the thoughtful discussion that we are adjourned.